Oh, wow. I love it, but
Oh, wow.
I want to hear how long in
Istanbul, we just went through.
The summit of what?
It says we identify an overall, but promises and pitfalls.
Very generous.
And then, you know, I organized, for example, the opening session where, you know, we had the head of
We seem to bump into each other in many places.
Are there specific she's flying away today to Portugal to meet her.
Dear colleagues, partners and guests, welcome to TPQ's Roundtable on NATO's open door policy, which has been made possible thanks to the kind cooperation of Alliance's Public Diplomacy Division. Before making a few quick remarks, I would like to thank everyone for believing in TPQ and supporting us. Our deepest appreciation also extends to the extensive list of partners who have helped TPQ flourish since its launch in 2002 and remain a household name in international publishing world. As you know, we are witnessing a period of constantly changing balances in global affairs. In such a world marked by intensifying global tensions, NATO's growing importance attests to the organization's long-standing significance. The complex web of contemporary geopolitical concerns, ranging from regional conflicts to the growth of new technology, emphasizes the importance of a collective defense system. NATO's emphasis on mutual aid and joint security is a major driver for stability in a world full of unpredictability. To begin with, it's essential to highlight the fact that the alliance facilitates diplomatic interaction and serves as a platform for member governments to pool resources and share intelligence. NATO's importance in promoting collective security, discouraging prospective adversaries, and maintaining stability in an increasingly interconnected globe grows as a response to such changes. We are very pleased that we can now hold this crucial conference where our esteemed speakers will address their different point of view on the current and upcoming aspects of NATO's enlargement process. First and foremost, we believe these conversations will reinforce our most recent Spring 2023 issue, which we published at the start of June. In this special edition, on which we also partnered with NATO's Public Democracy Division, we hope to delve into the many facets of NATO's growth, looking ahead at the difficulties and opportunities ahead. Following the beginning of Russia's aggression towards Ukraine and concurrently intensifying debates concerning the start of a new Cold War in our time, our other specialists from various fields contributed their valuable opinions regarding these pivotal debates. Given the length of time that has elapsed since the publication of our spring issue, we hope to advance the conversation further with this roundtable event and learn some more, even more fresh and intriguing perspectives. I am very grateful for this opportunity to moderate this important event. Please allow me to politely refresh your memory on our format once again we get started. The first part of the program will consist of opening remarks from each of our notable speakers and is expected to last somewhat longer than an hour. After hearing this forward-looking and informative talk, we'll take a 10-minute coffee break. Finally, we have a concluding Q&A session where our participants and guests can raise their questions to our experts. Simultaneous Turkish translation will be available for both for the talks and the Q&A. Furthermore, our event will be broadcast via Zoom to our registered participants worldwide who choose to participate in our roundtable online. As it is our first time having these two features, please kindly inform us if you are encountering any technical issues. Our young team will be more than glad to assist you in solving these issues. Lastly, let me briefly introduce our distinguished speakers to you. First, we have Mr. Petre Roman, who is the Prime Minister of Romania from 1989 to 1991. He was also the President of the Senate from 1996 to 1999 and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1999 to 2000. He was the leader of Democratic Force Party, which he founded after leaving the Democratic Party in 2003. He had previously served as an MP in the lower chamber, elected in 2012. He is an engineer from Polytechnics University of Bucharest and Paul Sabatier University. Next, we have Mr. Matthew Braiza. Ambassador Matthew Braiza is Managing Director of Istanbul office of Ballard Partners. He serves on the boards of energy, mining, and telecommunications companies operating from Caspian region to Texas. In 2012, Mr. Braiza completed a 23-year career as a U.S. diplomat, culminating as ambassador to Azerbaijan. Earlier, he served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and Director on the National Security Council staff at the White House. And also, Mr. Braiza was the Deputy Special Advisor to the President and Secretary of State on Caspian Basin energy securities. And our last guest is Ms. Megan Gislon, Managing Editor and Researcher at Istanbul Policy Center, will be our final speaker. Her areas of expertise are international relations, civil-military ties, and the United States-Turkey relationship. She completed her master's degree in Turkish Studies at Sabancı University in 2015, writing a thesis on relationship between the Turkish government and the military from 2000 to 2007. Now, not making this talk so long and taking more of your and our distinguished speakers' valuable time, I am leaving the floor to Mr. Petre Roman, our first speaker, to make his essential remarks and open the debates on our roundtable discussion. I'm confident you will have a good time at our event, and I hope that with your invaluable help, TPQ can continue hosting gatherings like this in the future years. Now you may begin, Mr. Roman.
Thank you. Thank you, Pina. Good morning, dear friends. I'm really glad to be here with you, debating on the meaning, the purpose, and maybe the fate of NATO, which is a subject very close to my own political activity, starting with the moment when I became of the last moments of the dictatorship and the first days of the democracy in my country, in Romania. Instead of trying to provide some kind of analysis concerning developments, the present developments of NATO, I could have maybe some ideas. I choose to present you some stories of the history, of the post-Cold War history of NATO, stories in which I was personally involved, stories which I think are significant to understand what happened and what should be taken into consideration for the continuous presence of NATO on the geopolitical global arena. I was, in a way, not surprised, but I registered with interest a very simple fact. In the issue of, in the magazine, the Foreign Affairs magazine, in this year, June, July, there were 2 articles on NATO. One submitted June 2023, to protect Europe, let Ukraine join NATO right now. No country is better at stopping Russia, written by Andrei Zagorodny, who was Minister of Defense of Ukraine, now working at the Atlantic Council. And another one, submitted July 2023, don't let Ukraine join NATO. The costs of expanding the alliance outweigh the benefits, written by two famous analysts, Justin Logan at the Cato Institute and Joshua Shifrinson, also from the Cato Institute. And also in a New York Times op-ed, famous George Kennan, the architect of America's Cold War containment policy, you certainly remember, castigating NATO enlargement, I quote, the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. So these articles reflect the true path of NATO in the post-Cold War era, between enlargement and non-enlargement. Now, in the first moments, the 22nd of December, 1989, after the dictators Ceausescu and his wife fled from the Central Committee headquarters in Bucharest, we were gathered in the same place, and one of the main subjects raised by Ion Iliescu, who was a politician with enough experience, saying we have to announce that we will keep our international engagements. What kind of engagements? By far the most important was the Pact of Warsaw. That was, there is nothing to blame. That was the moment. Nobody could know it at the time. Nobody. Not even the most, let's say, knowledgeable analysts or intelligence officer, American, would believe that the Soviet Union would disappear and there will not exist any more communist regimes in Europe. So I became Prime Minister, and in our mind, NATO was at the horizon, the beacon of our independence, the beacon of democracy. That was certainly true for me and many other European leaders like Václav Havel or Walesa and many others. Mazowiecki also. But I think the symbol of the end of the Cold War was and it still is, obviously, the fall of the Berlin Wall, an image which probably billions in the world have seen. But from the political perspective, the turning point is not there. When you say turning point in history, you have to put a date and a place. And from my perspective, it was the turning point was the last summit of the Warsaw Pact, which was on the 7th of June, 1990, in Moscow. We were there, all the new leaders of the former socialist countries. Václav Havel, Walesa, even the new leaders of East Germany. At this meeting, Gorbachev came with a plan, proposing two options. Either to reform the Warsaw Pact, based, of course, on a very different principles, more democratic. Or a second option was to establish a new kind of mutual security agreement. All of us rejected this plan of Gorbachev, even the Eastern Germans. For us, there was only one way, even as I myself expressed the Romanian position there, which was even to have free hands to join NATO. It was 7th of June 1990, and myself, I said, we would like one day to join NATO. It was quite a surprise. So that is really the turning point, because there, in fact, de facto, the Warsaw Pact doesn't exist anymore, and there is only one organization of security in Europe, NATO. Another interesting story, a nice one, I think. In April 1990, I paid an official visit to Spain. And I was received with great sympathy, also because my mother was Spanish. Because my father fought, he was the commander of the artillery of the international brigades in the Civil War in Spain. My mother was Spanish, from Santander. Okay, the prime minister in that moment was Felipe González, a fabulous politician, European politician. And we get really, almost immediately we get friends, we became friends. And then I asked Felipe some advice on different matters. And he said, Petre, you should think about joining NATO. That was quite strange, because Felipe González became prime minister, won the elections in 1985 on a platform calling for a referendum to say yes or no to NATO. Of course, the platform was against NATO and to dismantle the American naval bases for submarines in Spain. He became prime minister. He became also completely convinced that Spain should remain integrated in NATO. So he had a big dilemma what to do. So he told me, I decided to solve this dilemma, keeping the referendum and telling to the people, you vote as you want, but myself, I will vote no. No to separate from NATO. And the no vote won, and Spain remained in NATO. So what Felipe González told me then, of course, it was a very important, let's say, benchmark, guiding point for me. So immediately after I won the first free elections in the Romanian history, in fact, in May 1990, I became prime minister, and already on the 24th of July that year, 1990, I wrote a letter to Manfred Werner, who was the Secretary General of NATO, a fine man, I promise you. I didn't know at the time that I was the first and the only one prime minister writing in that sense. Writing what? That we want to have a diplomatic mission to NATO. That was, from my, as I put it, a little bit a trick. Because to have a diplomatic mission in NATO, it was possible only if you were a member of NATO. So in October, I was received officially at the headquarters of, in Brussels. It was a very important visit. And then, of course, I said, like in June in Moscow, we want to join NATO. I didn't figure then that the path, the journey will be long. But it started like that. Now, the turning point from this perspective, I told you, was 7th of June Moscow. But the key moment, in some weird, let's say inexplicable way, not mentioned, rarely mentioned, is the Moscow Putsch. The Moscow Putsch. I was in Madrid the 19th of August as a prime minister when the putsch has been was triggered, announced. And of course, immediately, I have a talk with Felipe González. And I was surprised then. After that, I understood. I was surprised that the Western reaction was tepid. Because there was a dilemma. First of all, the Western leaders, absolutely right, they wanted to protect Gorbachev. Gorbachev was then our great hero. Because of him, of his reforms, the Cold War ended. So, as it ended. On the other side, of course, the putsch showed that there is still a big danger of rebate of coming back to an era of confrontation, because in the Soviet Union there were enough forces to try to do that. I came back to Bucharest. I immediately summoned my government, my cabinet, and we collectively, my ministers were all of the best quality. We prepared a communique, a statement. And the core of the statement was very simple. We do not want to see anymore tanks against our own population. Tanks against civilians. To my great surprise, the next day, we found that this statement was the strongest in the democratic camp, in the Western camp. I remember USA Today on the first page, right on the top right, my photo and the statement. Iliescu was furiously against that. He was the president of Romania, thinking that the things might change and that Romania could be under a very big pressure. But of course, already in Madrid, 2 days before, 1 day before, in a big press conference, you can imagine I was the only leader from the East, being there under the circumstances of the Moscow Putsch. I already said then, one thing I tell you, our path to democracy won't change. So this disruption, this feeling about the danger of the revival of imperialistic, today we call it obsession, imperialistic views, imperialistic ambition was there. And that made many of the new leaders, the democratic leaders, to have even stronger belief, to adopt even stronger position that what we need, the only way to secure our democracy is to be part of NATO. Then, after the putsch in Romania, which happened in September 1991, and my government was, it was a coup d'etat, as the historians put it. With my party, we became the opposition to the so-called reform communist parties, who stopped the reforms. Very briefly saying that under my command as Prime Minister, we managed to, in the very, very nice parliament at the moment, elect very freely, I think freely elected, very, very nice people there, we managed to vote and to adopt 100 laws, political and market economy. That is to establish market economy in Romania and to establish the institutional framework for democratic institutions. But then after the elections in 1992, I was invited to be to the NATO Assembly, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, as a representative of Romania, being a member of the parliament. And on the initiative of the American delegation, supported by others, I was elected as special rapporteur of NATO. On what matter? On enlargement. Then there were two camps, the same, for enlargement, against enlargement. The British, the Germans, even the French, for instance, were decidedly against enlargement. We do not want you in NATO to bring us plenty of problems, plenty of critical issues. No. On the other side were the Baltic states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic and Slovakia, and Hungary and Romania, but especially Poland and the Baltic states, pushing very, very hard, saying the enlargement is absolutely necessary in order to protect us from Russia. Precisely what even the Americans didn't want to listen to. Don't mention that. At the time, Russia under Yeltsin was supposedly a friend. The problem, my problem, was as a special rapporteur, because every year I had to present 2 reports. And of course, the most important report then was on enlargement. So I was caught in between those 2 opposite positions, opinions. And a report, a special report on NATO, these are the rules there, is considered adopted only by consensus. So what to do? The moment I had to present the report was approaching, and I didn't know what to do. Finally, one day, I had, please forgive me my lack of modesty, I had a good idea. I proposed the formula that all accepted, which was, we want to be in NATO, not against Russia, but for us. And everybody accepted that. And even today, this phrase could have some importance. Now, to really understand how NATO works or works well or doesn't work well, I think the most significant story is about the NATO operation in former Yugoslavia against Milosevic in January 1999. That was the moment, after the massacres in Srebrenica and the fact that there the peacekeeping troops did nothing to prevent the massacre, the West was completely galvanized. And when I think the Americans proposed the so-called surgical bombardments against the institution of Milosevic in Belgrade, all the NATO countries joined without restriction. I remember Pierre Bonroy, Prime Minister of France, good friend of mine, who told me, Petre, you have to understand, we are like that. We are like that, like a fist. Okay, so the NATO military asked Romania to join the operation. It was very important. Why? Because if Romania joined the NATO operation, then Romania would close the aerial space and namely close the airspace against Russia. They couldn't anymore fly to Serbia. And I'm not telling you another story how we succeed that. I was, as a chairman of the parliament, the speaker of the parliament and of the Senate, I was the one because I proposed that this decision to be taken not only at the level of the president and the leadership, but to be taken by the parliament. And there was many who said, no, it's impossible because the pollings show, the public opinion is against the intervention of Romania in Serbia. I said, no, we have to, I assume this responsibility, and I succeeded in that sense, that with a vast majority, the Romanian parliament voted in favor of Romania joining this operation. This moment is a turning point for Romania, because then the West said, you are one of us. The reason was very simple. After Romania joined the operation, the head of the general staff of Milosevic tell Milosevic, you know, with the Americans, with American planes at 80 kilometers, it was in Timișoara, 80 kilometers from Belgrade, the game is over. And it was over. The problem was not solved because Milosevic already continued to be president of. But it was a turning point for Romania, a turning point, a very important point. And stories like that could tell you leaders from Poland, from Baltic states, from Czechoslovakia, some kind of these stories. So my idea is that the enlargement of NATO was, I would say, imparable. Nobody could stop that because the will of the countries wanting to join NATO was so strong and so obviously defensive and justifiable, that I think enlargement of NATO was rather the absolutely normal thing to do. So it took, for Romania, it took 24 years to become a member of NATO. 24 years. No, not, I'm sorry, 14 years. 14 years, not 24 years. It's 2004. It's 14 years. It took 14 years, which is a long period. It is showing something. It is showing something. How big political decisions cannot be so easily transformed into realities, as it happened with us. Now, to conclude, when especially Putin says, and others, some analysts say, even in the West, when they say that the enlargement of NATO was the main cause of the invasion of Ukraine, I say colloquially rubbish. Because already in 2008, Putin said clearly, Ukraine is not a state. It's not a state. It is part of Russia. Then, in 2014, he invaded Crimea. The reaction of the West was very tepid, and especially of the Germans. I remember vividly, one day after the invasion of Crimea, I saw Putin on a press conference live on TV saying, "My German friends will understand." And he was absolutely right at the time. Now it's the same obsession with the imperial ambition, enlargement of Russia on the expense of the others. And I am an admirer, a profound admirer of the Russian culture. Without the Russian culture, there is no Western culture. And I speak Russian. And I'm very much against Putin because, now I think, because Russia, at least in terms of infrastructure, is a country of the tiers-monde, the third world. Instead of developing Russia, making the necessary reforms and transform Russia into a big economic power, which Russia isn't, he decided what? To expand Russia. Already huge, almost a continent. Nonsense. I was struck, as you probably, if you remember that, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the phone conversation of the Russian soldiers were intercepted, yes. And I remember one of the conversations of a simple Russian soldier with his wife from a village in Russia. He was in a village in Ukraine. And he told his wife, you know, here there are paved roads in the village. He never saw paved roads in a village. Putin did that, do that for your country. Not embarrass everybody with your paranoia. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I have your microphone. I have Pinar's.
We would like to thank to President Roman for his valuable remarks. It affects us very deeply. Now I am presenting Ambassador Bryza.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's working. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Pinar and TPQ for organizing this. Thanks for the honor of you being here. Friends, professors, consuls general. I'm really inspired by what Prime Minister Roman said. I've followed his career for decades, and I'm going to provide an analytical framework, I think, to what he was talking about. And my argument is going to be essentially what he was saying just now at the end, that it's false when Putin claims that NATO enlargement is the motivation for his invasion of Ukraine. I'll argue, though, the point is that NATO, of course, is a voluntary organization, which is what we were just talking about. It's the most successful defensive security alliance in history. And finally, the third set of points is that the United States has been a driving force after the early days in NATO enlargement. But the open door policy that we're supposed to spend some time talking about has not been so successful since that large round of enlargement. And of course, Ukraine and Georgia have been knocking on NATO's door all these years and had had they been granted a membership action plan at that fateful, disastrous NATO summit in Bucharest in April 2008, I don't think Russia ever would have dared to invade Georgia, and had it not invaded Georgia, it never would have invaded Ukraine in 2014 or again in 2022. Before I get to the meat of that, though, I have a couple of reminiscences of my own. So as I was saying to the Prime Minister over coffee before we began, and the point of this is how the impossible can be made possible, especially through NATO membership. So in 1989, I had just joined the US Foreign Service. I was posted to Poland, which was my dream as a Polish American, just as all of these changes were happening. And my closest friend in my Foreign Service entering class was posted to Bucharest. This was in the autumn of 1989. And he sent me a Christmas card, 1989, which arrived in January. But he said, yeah, we're having a great time here in Romania, my family and I, but the politics are depressing. Ceausescu's personality cult is fully flowering. There's no sign of any political change on the horizon. Now, Merry Christmas, 1989. But by the time I received the card, Ceausescu was dead, and the Prime Minister and then President Iliescu were coming to power. And so these changes seemed impossible in 1989. And even in 1990, you mentioned Lech Wałęsa. And so in the autumn of 1990, then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was visiting. We went to Gdańsk. I was the control officer and met with Lech Wałęsa, who had not yet been elected Polish president, but was about to be. And during the meeting, Wałęsa said, Poland would like to buy US F-16 fighter jets. And Secretary Cheney said, wow, fighter jets, but you're in the Warsaw Pact, and okay, let's talk about it. And on the way to the airport, Cheney was sort of laughing, saying, how could they think there's any chance they're going to get US F-16s? This is 1990. And a few months later, the Warsaw Pact no longer existed. And throughout all this period, now this is getting to the point of NATO being a voluntary organization, building on your points, my Polish colleagues and our other Eastern European friends, their greatest desire was to return to Europe. They had been so deeply part of Europe. Poland in particular felt like it was such a cornerstone of European democratic traditions dating back to the Renaissance period and the period of liberum veto in Poland, where any nobleman could stand up and block the election of a king. And NATO membership was the way symbolically and politically to return to Europe, and it was the way to be protected against a Russia that, of course, as it always had, was going to react negatively to Poland's, Romania's, Czech Republic, Slovakia's return to their rightful places in Europe. So NATO was both the enabler in terms of security, but also the enabler in terms of imagination, to see a mechanism to make the impossible possible. And that's a point I think a lot of my colleagues who were in favor of NATO enlargement in Washington embraced. But those who were worried about the relationship with Yeltsin or afraid of Putin subsequently have never really appreciated. But NATO was that great enabler. Second set of points, the defensive nature or the voluntary nature of NATO. I mentioned before, I totally believe that had Ukraine and Georgia received a membership action plan at Bucharest, Putin never would have invaded. And I just happened that morning, President Bush gave a speech. I happened to be seated somewhere in a row right in front of his wife, in front of Mrs. Bush. So he had to see me. And he came over to me after his speech, and he said, I'm going to fight like heck tonight for your friend, Saakashvili, for Georgia, to get a membership action plan. But to tell you the truth, I don't think I'm necessarily going to win. And he was worried about the Chancellor Merkel. And in the weeks leading up to that, the United States had been pushing for membership action plans for Ukraine and for Georgia. And then when we saw so much opposition from some key NATO member states, I was instructed to stop speaking publicly about how much we support a membership action plan for those countries. I got a call from the Secretary of State, in fact, who said, please, no, we haven't finalized that we're going to make this big push in Bucharest, which was devastating for me. And then about a week and a half later, I got another call saying, okay, the president has decided personally, against the advice of so many members of the US national security establishment, to fight for membership action plan for Georgia and Ukraine. That was President Bush's personal decision after the bureaucracy resisted and frankly deterred itself. Just like we've deterred ourselves in Ukraine, as I look at Maxim, by being afraid of crossing each Russian red line and delivering Ukraine the weaponry it needs to survive and prevail. We deter ourselves when Putin makes an empty threat or Dmitry Medvedev makes his nuclear saber-rattling threats. Every time we've passed the red line, Russia's done nothing. Because Russia believes that its most powerful diplomatic tool is fear. And when we call its bluff, it has no option but to retreat or not to move forward as aggressively as possible. So NATO being defensive and successful, we can see in terms of the latest round of enlargement. Sweden, hopefully soon, Turkish Grand National Assembly will soon, of course, the Committee on Foreign Affairs will soon approve Sweden's bid, and Finland entering. So Putin claimed, before invading Ukraine the second time, that he had to do it because of NATO enlargement. And you'll remember in the winter leading up, so 2019, 2020, he made all sorts of claims and demands, right, on NATO that it basically rolled back enlargement. That the troops that NATO had deployed, not only in 2014 after Russia invaded Donbass and Crimea, be withdrawn, because NATO only deployed more permanent troops in 2014 after the invasion, but also that all of the military structures and deployments that had happened in the former Warsaw Pact countries also be pulled back, and essentially that the United States would shrink NATO. He knew there was no way that that would ever be accepted by NATO or by the United States. But made the demands anyway, and I did an interview, I remember, I'll never forget this interview on Al Jazeera, not English, but Arabic, which is very pro-Russian. They said to me, well, what's going to happen? What's the US going to do? Putin has made these demands to shrink back NATO. And I said, he's going to have to give up those demands because they will never be accepted by NATO. And they were incredulous. They're saying, how can that be? I said, just watch. NATO will never agree to pull back. And of course, it hasn't and won't. So his goal, as you were saying, Mr. Prime Minister, Putin's goal all along was to dismantle Ukraine, to eliminate it as a nation, as he said back in 2008, and more recently, 2 summers ago, with that landmark article he wrote saying there's not even a real Ukrainian language. And he wanted, I think, to finish the business of 2014, where after he invaded Crimea and annexed it, and then Donbass, he lost the rest of Ukraine, right? The rest of Ukraine was alienated from Russia, whereas in 2008, Ukraine had not clearly decided that it wanted to join NATO. After 2014, of course, there was an overwhelming popular support for Ukraine's NATO membership. So Putin had lost Ukraine, and he wanted to pull it back by force. And thank God he's failing, and we have to make sure he doesn't prevail, because after Ukraine, what's next? I mean, clearly Georgia, unfinished business there, clearly Moldova, and then maybe the Baltic states. So that gets us back to this current round of enlargement, and I'll wrap up with the NATO open door and problems in the United States. So Putin wanted less NATO. He purported, right? He claimed that's why he invaded Ukraine, and he got much more NATO on his doorstep than he ever imagined. The impossible has again happened, Finland joining NATO with the largest contingent of F-35 fighter jets deployed there. NATO's border with Russia has doubled in response to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. Sweden is, as we were saying, it will join soon. And I ran a think tank in Estonia for a while. It was a Ministry of Defense funded think tank. And so we thought a lot at that time, 2012 to 2015, about how difficult it was becoming for NATO to reinforce the Baltic states if Russia behaved in an aggressive way. Russia was moving toward A2AD, so anti-access aerial denial, trying basically to create an air defense capability and naval capability that would prevent NATO from reinforcing the Baltic states. And if that reality happened, then NATO's Article 5 deterrence is undermined and the risk of a military conflict increases. Something not many people realize is that during the period of President Obama's Russia reset policy, so from after President Obama was elected in 2008, so from 2009 until around 2015, Russia's military buildup in the Baltic region was unprecedented in peacetime history, unprecedented. It included the deployment of Iskander missiles, so kind of quasi-strategic missiles to Kaliningrad. It included the formation of new helicopter assault brigades, new fighter bomber squadrons in the northwest part of Russia, new armored brigades, in response to the Russia reset policy. So we showed we wanted to have a softer approach toward Russia, and we got in the Baltic states was a much more aggressive posture by Russia. So there's a need to remove ambiguity when it comes to Russia's ambitions. Expansion and coexistence is the underlying mindset, I think, of Russian foreign policy. As the great scholar of Russia at Harvard, Adam Ulam, wrote decades ago, his classic book on Russian foreign policy, going back to the imperial period, Expansion and Coexistence. Russia will feel a need to expand while it coexists, and if we don't stop it by removing the pretexts for expansion, it will just keep going. And so with Sweden now and Finland in NATO, that anti-access aerial denial quest by Russia is no longer possible. The aerial denial is impossible with all those F-35s now that Finland has deployed. Swedish Navy and its submarine capability will prevent any sort of maritime dominance by Russia of the Baltic Sea. And as the cliche goes, the Baltic has become a NATO lake. And what has been Putin's response? What has been his response to Finland's joining NATO and Sweden's ambitions to do so? Nothing. Nothing. He said, well, we will respond in an appropriate way. And there's been no significant increase in tension between Helsinki and Moscow or between Stockholm and Moscow. There was already high tension between Stockholm and Moscow. So enlargement, I think, is the most stabilizing way that we can proceed with NATO. And if you look back to the broad sweep of European history, going back to the times of the Byzantine Empire, beginning in the 5th century, all the way through the 19th century, the history of Europe, as by the way, the great TPQ article about the history of NATO and Europe in the spring edition outlined, it's been one of continuous wars and then periodic alliances to try to prevent one group or one country or one region from dominating Europe. We've had none of that for 70 years, thanks to NATO. Thanks to NATO making it clear that Russian expansion is not in the cards and coexistence is the way we need to proceed. Finally, the United States. For me, the huge relief of many that Joe Biden became president and Donald Trump was gone was that for Biden, NATO is at the very center of all of his strategic calculus. Even if you look to the Indo-Pacific region, one of the cornerstones of what the US is promoting is AUKUS. It's Australia, UK, and United States. And he was President Obama's point person for Ukraine. Having worked directly with him, even when I was serving in Moscow, 95 to 97, it was so clear how important NATO is for Joe Biden. And he's proven that. And thanks to US leadership in response to Putin's second invasion of Ukraine, NATO is more cohesive, more united than it's ever been. And its strategic concept in 2022, only the 8th one in NATO's history, right? Only the 4th strategic concept since the Cold War ended, is all about collective defense, deterrence. There's nothing aggressive, nothing offensive toward Russia. It's about collective defense to deter a wide range of threats, including deterring China's various challenges, but it doesn't call China an adversary or a threat. No, the strategic concept is about deterring Russia. The bad news is, it's clear President Trump is by far the front runner to win the Republican nomination. Nobody's close to him in the primaries. Okay, there's a chance he's going to be convicted of various felonies. He could be in prison a year from now. But in a crazy US system, he can still run and win the presidency, even from prison. Whether or not the Democrats choose to field a candidate that can beat him remains to be seen. President Biden's support has fallen vis-a-vis Trump significantly. You may have seen the recent poll in the New York Times that showed in 5 key battleground states that were crucial for Biden's victory over Trump. Trump is now either even or beating Biden in those states. So a year is a long time in American politics, in any political system. A lot is going to change. And if and when Trump is convicted, it'll be interesting to see how independent voters react. But if President Trump is reelected, I am very pessimistic about NATO's future. He's already called NATO obsolete when he was president. He's already been saying, or suggesting he'd pull the US out of NATO. And a Europe and transatlantic family without US membership in NATO is an absolute nightmare. And all of these things that we've been talking about freedom of choice, new realities, countries securing their democratic, independent futures would be called into play. Sorry to end on a pessimistic note, but we have a year, and I think a lot will change politically in the US. Thank you.
I got this. Oh, I'm like already. Is there like a ledge? Sorry, I came with my laptop today. Let's see if it will. Yep, perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to TPQ for having me this morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, following up on our other panelists, seeing that my experience with NATO is working in capacity as a young professional, and therefore my 5 years experience is a little bit modest compared to our panelists today. I'm clearly the least qualified to talk about NATO's past or sort of give any quips or stories. Therefore, I'm going to be talking about NATO's present and future today. And then, since this event is in conjunction with the previous issue of TPQ on NATO enlargement, I'll sort of briefly go over some of the points that we discussed in our article with Fouad Kamen, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. And of course, I'll add a few new points since we've had 6 months in between publication, as well as a NATO summit in Vilnius. So in our article that we published in TPQ, for those that haven't read it, it's titled The 3 Dimensions of NATO Enlargement, from the Arctic to the Black Sea and Beyond. And we sort of started with a larger view of NATO within the international order and the global effects of enlargement on the international order. So before getting to the first point, I just wanted to also preface that when I say the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, I mean the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, since I think it's also very important to remember, and our other panelists reminded us that, of course, Ukraine has been occupied in some capacity by Russia since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Anyway, on to the first point. Since the invasion, we've seen the world divided into 3 camps. Those who support the invasion and have no qualms about aiding Russia, those who have moved closer to the pro-NATO camp and support Ukraine, and those who have chosen to be non-aligned. While this invasion of Ukraine has in some sense been a victory for multilateralism, as we've seen historically neutral countries, Finland and hopefully soon Sweden, joining NATO, we have also seen this emergence of a third group of non-aligned states, which presents both challenges and opportunities for the future of the world order. Through the rise of these, though the rise of these middle or regional powers is not a particularly post-Ukraine phenomenon, the rise of non-aligned states has yielded new implications since the war. Although the majority of these non-aligned states voted to condemn Russia's war of aggression within the United Nations, many of these states have prioritized their own significant trade, energy, or security ties with Russia over their moral stance on the conflict, with 46 of these 141 nations only fully committing to the US-led sanctions regime on Moscow. Though this bloc of third nations has sort of no collective character or means of solidifying, some of these proposals look like Brazilian President Lula da Silva's organization or aims to organize a peace club to force negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, or China's Central Asian Summit, which was organized at the same time of this year's G7 summit. Again, while the sort of trend of regional powers as prominent actors on the world stage isn't necessarily new, the war in Ukraine has, of course, put these actors in a more precarious position. And then towards the second point that we look at, regionally within Europe, NATO's recent enlargement has shifted the strategic focus towards Europe's northeast. The addition of the Baltic littoral states into the alliance provides additional security guarantees and new avenues for reinforcing the region. Once Sweden becomes a member, the sea will effectively turn into a NATO lake, as we've already heard, or you might have heard many times, in which NATO can expand its land, air, and sea power. And just to name a few of the strategic advantages these members will provide. In the air, Finnish Lapland is set to host the world's second largest fleet of F-35 fighter jets by 2026, which will also expand NATO's Baltic air policing mission. On the sea, access to Swedish and Finnish islands will offer strategic assets for the defense of the Baltic littoral nations. Access to here will also help bolster the defense of the Baltic NATO members, who have been notoriously difficult to defend due to the fact that they're only accessible by land by a 60-mile gap, the Suwalki Gap. And then on land, Finland's accession has doubled NATO's borders with Russia. And then, perhaps most importantly, in future, NATO and Sweden's move towards NATO membership has not only reshaped the strategic landscape of the Baltic Sea, but the Arctic. Politically, with Finland and Sweden's membership, Russia will be the only member of the Arctic Council that is not a member of NATO. Militarily, Finland's sizable icebreaker fleet and Sweden's submarine fleet will help to secure the high seas. And an increased NATO presence inside the Arctic Circle not only has the potential to counter Russia's militarization of the region, but also China's efforts to further build up its polar Silk Road. As NATO's high north has become increasingly important to NATO allied security, as the ice in the Arctic continues to melt due to climate change, Sweden and Finland are essential to help NATO defend this new strategic center. Finally, Finland and Sweden have more or less already been integrated within NATO's military structures since becoming enhanced opportunity partners during the Wales Summit in 2014. Both have participated in several NATO missions and regular exercise with NATO troops. And both being members of the European Union since 1995, their inclusion also offers greater opportunities for NATO-EU cooperation. Finally, the third dimension of NATO enlargement that is important to examine is the national dimension, in which we've mentioned Turkey in our article and its strategic balancing act within NATO. Although we wrote our article right after the May elections and before the Vilnius summit, practically speaking, not much has changed regarding the situation of Sweden's accession, though the issue has now at least made it to the parliamentary floor. Despite Sweden having addressed Turkey's concerns to an extent that has not only amended its constitution, but also prosecuted dozens of individuals with links to the PKK, several political actors within Turkey have continued to delay Sweden's accession, most recently by delaying the Grand National Assembly's vote on this session until the next undetermined parliamentary session. Well, probably most of you are familiar with this situation and have your own explanation of events or thoughts on it. It is clear that such political jockeying is linked to Turkey's nationalist turn, which we saw clearly in the most recent parliamentary elections, with the majority of parliamentarians being elected from right-wing or nationalist parties or platforms. The delay in Sweden's secession is especially concerning now that these nationalist actors continue to engage in such transactional behavior, such as linking Turkish approval of Swedish secession, or insisting that it must be linked to the US Congress's approval of the F-16 fighter jets, and even at times, and more unrealistically, even EU membership. Such moves are harmful to the spirit of multilateralism and unfortunately sow the seeds for distrust in Ankara within the alliance in the long term. Additionally, the conflict in Ukraine has once again brought to the fore Ankara's strategic balancing act between Russia and its membership in NATO. Though unfortunately we have no longer have the Black Sea Grain Initiative on the table thanks to Russia, Turkey has been a fervent mediator between the two sides and has been an active partner in establishing alternative routes for grain, such as the alternative route we see in the Danube. However, as Ankara keeps one ear open to Moscow, this more importantly necessitates that Ankara maintains and strengthens its anchor within NATO and shifts its strategic balance west to be firmly identified as a NATO member rather than a global swing state. So, in the face of the above challenges, what is next for the NATO alliance? Well, I'm not sure that I need to point out the fact that we live in an increasingly unstable world, which is riddled with increasingly complex challenges. We can just look around and see this. Every realm of daily life can be viewed as a strategic setting, from the content we consume on our phones, to the climate we experience outside, to the constitution of the people we see around us. And younger generations have a heightened sense of this insecurity. It's not just because of the fear of climate that has been instilled in them. Rather, it is in part due to the fact that the Western world is rudderless, and war in Ukraine is, very unfortunately, to the human cost in that country, the only way that is sending many ships back to Western ports. However, that being said, while many Western political leaders have verbally moved closer towards this renewed sense of multilateralism, there is still a gap in what is said and what is done. We need look no further than Germany's Zeitenwende, which, while on paper is a remarkable policy metamorphosis for Germany, has shown minimal tangible outcomes. As of August, only 30 of the 100 billion euros earmarked for defense spending have been allocated, not even spent, allocated. And at that, the bulk of these allocated funds are on long-term weapons procurements and not on anything that will be immediately realized in the conflict. Additionally, we see floundering leadership in the US Congress, who passed the last two spending bills without any additional funding to Ukraine, leaving the Biden administration on Monday to offer a $100 million security assistance package from the Department of Defense in order to shore up support for Ukraine. In September, we also saw Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia block imports of Ukrainian grain, not only violating the EU's single market rules, but more importantly, demonstrating signs of disunity between NATO members and Kiev. This crisis appeared even worse after Poland's remarks that will no longer be focusing on, or it will be focusing on arming itself rather than supplying weapons to Ukraine. While values have been at the center of NATO's discussion on moving forward toward 2030, it is understandably hard for young people to see alliance values and cohesion when Western leaders are unable to present a united front. While it may be difficult to ask leaders to check their national interests at the door when they enter NATO debates, the desire to achieve a united front within NATO ought to be of interest to every member state, which is not clearly demonstrated currently. NATO's leaders must have confidence in NATO policies first if they want to continue to inspire younger generations to become transatlantic supporters. And on that note, we'll look for the Q&A.
I would like to thank to our guests, valuable speakers, for their contributions. Now I want to have a coffee break for 10 minutes. Then we can go back and go on a Q&A session. And we are waiting for your contributions to our roundtable. So let's have a break for 10-15 minutes. See you.